It's great to see so many of you staying from the 11 a.m. and great to see a few new faces for our keynote speech. Those of us who went to COP29 in Baku during the first week this last COP had the opportunity to meet Esquire Henry, who is joining us today. I try not to have notes usually, but he has done so many things that I wouldn't be able to keep track without them. So Esquire Henry is a National and CARICOM Youth Ambassador for Antigua and Barbuda, a member of the United Nations Youth Advisory Group for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, and a member of the Caribbean Development Bank's Future Leaders Network. Through all of those roles, he amplifies youth voices on critical issues, particularly climate change, though he has other projects. He spearheaded numerous local climate initiatives from workshop to community projects, and you'll get to hear some of that, his work and his colleagues' work shortly. His leadership has earned him numerous accolades, including the 2023 Department of Youth Affairs National Youth Awards for Community Service and Young Activism. We're really excited to have him here. And I just want to say a special thanks to one of our student workers, Dominique, who knows Esquire through her own youth activism in the Caribbean and was able to do the initial introduction and help us get to know him. So without further ado, I will give it up to Esquire.
Good afternoon. 1, 2. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. So in true Caribbean style, there's a way that we normally start a meeting, because I know you guys just ate. So when I ask you how you feeling, I want you to say, we feel good. We feel so good. Hype with all the energy that you have. So how you feeling? We feel good. We feel so good. Hype. So let's go one more time. How you feeling? We feel good. We feel so good. Hype. So I have a 10-page speech that I wrote because I thought it was a more formal introduction. So bear with me as I navigate between sticking to the speech and utilize a more flexible style. But for the first part, let me go to the speech. So what I want you to do is to close your eyes for me, everyone. And I want you to imagine waking up to the gentle sounds of waves caressing the shore, or the alarm clock of crowing chickens, watching the sunrise over beautiful beaches, or palm trees swaying in the warm breeze. Perhaps smelling the scent of seaweed as it fills the air. This is Antigua and Barbuda, my home, a twin island paradise in the heart of the Caribbean, known for its vibrant culture and the famous 365 beaches, one for every day of the year. Now you can open your eyes. So for those of you who have not visited us yet, I know after that description you have some interest. But this beautiful island is what allowed me to join advocacy. It built me, it inspired me, and it taught me so many lessons. But let me ask you to imagine something else. Imagine going to bed in this beautiful paradise, calmed by the familiar sounds of the sea. Then, in the dead of night, you're awakened. Not by the gentle surf, but by the deafening roar of winds tearing through your home, by the relentless pounding of rain against your roof, and the blinding flashes of light slicing through the sky. Hours later, as the storm collapsed, you discover that 80% of the infrastructure on your sister island has been wiped away, leaving home shattered, community displaced, and lives forever changed. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is the lived reality of my people. In September 2017, Hurricane Irma, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded in the Atlantic, battered Barbuda with 185 miles per hour winds, leaving the island completely in ruins. Over 80% of the buildings were destroyed, road and infrastructures lay in shambles. Every single resident, men, women, children, was forced to evacuate. For the first time in centuries, Barbuda stood uninhabited. The cost of damages exceed 220 million USD, a staggering figure for a small nation. But beyond the monetary loss, there was a cultural devastation that no dollar amount could quantify. And Barbuda's story is not unique. In 2017, Hurricane Maria decimated Dominica, wiping out 90% of their infrastructure and plunging the island into complete darkness. Schools, hospitals, homes flattened in mere hours. The storm caused an estimated 1.3 billion in damages, nearly double and triple the country's GDP at that time. In 2019, the Bahamas bore the full wrath of the Hurricane Dorian, a Category 5 monster that stalled over the islands, unleashing sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and storm surges that swallowed entire communities. More than 70 lives were lost and thousands displaced. And just recently, last year to be exact, in July, Hurricane Beryl tore through the southern Caribbean, leaving St. Vincent and the Grenadines reeling in its wake. Across the Caribbean, climate change is not abstract. It's not something that's distant. It is our lived reality. It is here, it is now, and it is relentless. As a region, we are bound by more than just geography. We are bound by sheer struggles. The member states of CARICOM, which is one of the oldest integration movements in the developing world, and for those of you who don't understand what CARICOM means, just think of the EU, but for Caribbean islands. And we face the devastating impact of climate change. Rising sea levels threaten low-lying coasts of Guyana, Suriname, and Belize, displacing families and contaminating freshwater reserves. Drought and food insecurity grip the Eastern Caribbean, making it harder for farmers to sustain their crops and livelihoods. Coral bleaching, coral erosion, biodiversity loss jeopardize not only our ecosystem, but our economies and cultural heritage. Our economies are fragile, heavily reliant on tourism, agriculture, and fishing. All industries acutely vulnerable to climate disruption. Our infrastructure, built in an era where storms of this magnitude were extremely rare. It tested our limits, and it tested the building's limit. And unlike wealthier nations, we do not have the luxury of simply rebuilding or moving forward. If a storm hits us, like you see before in the stories that I mentioned, we have nowhere else to go. And this is the real reality of climate change. And this is why we have to stand firm in our advocacy at COP. And at the COP26, I heard many persons mention it today, the World Leaders Summit, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mayor Motley, declared, national solution to global problems do not work. Today, those words ring louder than ever. For decades, small and developing states have been on the front line of the climate crisis. As I mentioned, rising sea levels, intensifying hurricanes, prolonged droughts, and coastal erosions have become a reality. Yet, despite contributing less than 1% of global carbon emissions, we continue to bear the brunt of climate desolation. This glaring injustice is precisely why Antigua and Barbuda proudly hosted the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States, which is called SIDS4, last year. And this conference is a once-in-a-decade forum dedicated to securing solutions for a sustainable future and consists of all the small and developing state regions. So that would include the Caribbean region, the AICIS region, and also the Pacific region. A defining outcome of SIDS4 was the adoption of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, a strategic roadmap designed to address the most pressing challenges faced by small island states. Prime Minister Gaston Brown described the ABAS as a blueprint for collective prosperity and emphasized on its role in securing financing, strengthening resilience, and fostering innovation. A major pillar of ABAS was the establishment of the SIDS Center for Excellence, envisioned as a groundbreaking hub for technology and pioneering solutions. However, Prime Minister Brown issued a very stern warning. He stated, "We need the cooperation and support of the global community to ensure of the ABAS success. Without global cooperation, our hope of a secure future will crumble under the weight of inaction." For us, as SIDS, international conferences like COP are not mere ceremonial gathering where agreements are signed. It's a battlefield where we fight not with weapons, but with advocacy, word, diplomacy, and data, and we must have unyielding resolve. We fight to ensure that our existence is not threatened by the failure of larger, more industrial nations to curb global emissions. It is with this urgency that we approach COP29, determined to make sure the voice of SIDS were not just heard, but acted upon. The presence of representatives from the COP29 delegation in Azerbaijan at SIDS 4, so yes, they left all the way from Azerbaijan to come to my small region in Antigua and Barbuda, just before COP29. And they were there to listen to our demands and to show the importance of small and developing states in the advocacy and the forefront of climate action. But at COP, our demands were clear. Increased financing that is accessible, transparent, and tailored to the needs of SIDS, a commitment to limiting global temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius in line with the Paris Agreement, and the full authorization of the Loss and Damage Fund, ensuring that vulnerable nations who contribute the least to climate change but suffer the most receive the compensation and support we rightfully deserve. The negotiations of COP29 were intense, and I'm sure most of you saw that. And while we did not achieve all the goals, we're happy to see the Loss and Damage Fund finally activated, and it was definitely a historic milestone in the fight for justice. Concrete finance decisions were made to help vulnerable nations recover from climate disasters. Additionally, new financing mechanisms were introduced, offering SIDS improved access to climate adaptation funds. One of the most notable commitments from COP29 was the establishment of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. This agreement aims to triple financial support to developing nations, increasing from the previous target of USD 100 billion annually to USD 300 billion by 2035. Moreover, it seeks to mobilize a total of USD 1.3 trillion per year from the public and private sector. This enhanced financial support is crucial towards providing vulnerable nations with the resources needed to adapt. And the UN Climate Change Executive Secretary Simon still emphasized the importance of this commitment, stating, "This new financial goal is an insurance policy for humanity and worsening climate impacts hitting every country." However, while the NCQ represents progress, it is not without a shortcoming. The agreed upon US 300 billion is still very far from the estimate needed to develop our countries, which experts say could be triple that amount. And for SIDS, the challenge of mobilizing USD 1.3 trillion, as you can imagine, is extremely difficult. Historically, accessing private finance has been extremely difficult for us as small nations because we are characterized as CARICOM nations as with a high GDP to debt ratio. And can anybody tell me what that means? Anybody? Somebody that does. Anybody who has understanding of econ, a high debt to GDP? Basically, what it means is that as an island, we are responsible, and most of our GDP goes towards paying back debt. Debt that was incurred very, very long ago and had nothing to do with us as young people. So any money we earn now simply has to be put towards financing those debts. And that makes it very difficult for us to invest in green energy and climate and other climate solutions. Because when you have to finance salaries, finance progress in roads and other important infrastructure underground, and then you also look at you having to allocate funding to cover those debts, because quite frankly, if you don't pay, you'll be put in further problems. You have to ask yourself, then where does the remainder of the money come from to invest in climate solutions? Climate solutions that we definitely need. And this is why we're so active and argue so hard when it comes to COP and conferences like these, because it is important for us to advocate on the ground to ensure that our needs are addressed. And one of the most scary things that occurred for me this year was just a month after COP, we saw the recent announcement of the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. And the United States, as most of you know, is one of the largest emitters of green gases and green emissions. And this is very scary for us because from a personal perspective, when I review it and I observe what would become of the other countries, what would become of organizations, what policies would we use as the United States to keep them intact? What would we do? And this is why it's so important for us to view climate change and these conferences beyond a nation perspective. We now have to view it as a perspective, how do we hold businesses accountable? And that is one of the ways that we as small and developing states really want persons to start to consider. Because it shows that policies and these global agreements are so fragile. At any moment, any nation can just withdraw, move, and just face the consequences if they so wish. But it's so important for us now, as young people, to change the way of advocacy, to change our methods, and to really reach out to the market. And one of the things that SIDS 4 that we were focused on was the Children and Youth Action Summit, which reinforced our responsibility. It was the first ever gathering of its kind, and what it has done is to bring youth from all the different regions together. All the different SIDS regions. So we had persons from Fiji, I met persons from Samoa. All these different small island states were able to meet as young people. It was over 150 delegates from across all SIDS regions, and we discussed solutions. And we tackled it from not only a problem solution perspective, but how can we reshape the world? And one of the greatest outcomes of SIDS 4 was our commitment to action wall. And if you ever had the time, you could just Google it. It was a big, massive wall that all of us pledged our commitment to action. And we didn't even have the youth perspective only, but we also ensured that government officials, UN agencies, and other major stakeholders made a commitment to that wall. And that really guided our step towards COP29, because hey, we got it in public writing. And briefly, just to share my personal experience with you attending COP29, because just like someone stated earlier, I was very excited about the opportunity when I arrived for COP. In fact, when I arrived off the bus, because it was so fancy that they had buses to take us everywhere, I don't know if it was the same for you guys, but then you could literally hop on a bus from any location once it was COP29 bus and arrive at your destination in the venue. And it was so breathtaking to see all the different infrastructure that was surrounding in Baku. And it was a really opening and eye-opening experience for me. Because when we arrived at the venue, it was very, very, very fast paced. There was literally no time for you to sit down and do much. It was morning, early morning, straight to late night. And it was constant movement and progression. But this really put things into perspective. And it helped me to come up with 3 main objectives when I went to COP. And my objective was to learn as much as possible, to engage in meaningful, purposeful discussions, and to make a valuable contribution in every space I entered. I want to invite you on my journey, because it wasn't about just policies and negotiation. But the moment at COP was a redefining time, because as young people, we're not just leaders of the future, we're leaders in the present, capable of making lasting impact no matter how small an opportunity may seem. And I really want to take the time to acknowledge PAHO and the EU CARIFORM project for making my contributions at COP possible. In fact, we were able to do this through providing sponsorship and funding to the CARICOM Secretariat Climate Change and Health Project. And this is important to announce, because when I entered COP29, we quickly realized, and I'm sure other persons who attended had this experience, but there are many barriers in the blue zone, because there are a lot of restricted meetings, bureaucratic process, and limited speaking opportunities. However, I also witnessed something more remarkable. Young people from across the world refusing to be sidelined. We did not wait for permission to contribute. We actually carved out our own spaces to speak and to act. And we were able to do this through networking, collaboration, and other means. And as someone mentioned earlier, we are very creative in the ways that we choose to advocate, because there were a number of protests which took place across the venue. And then the more important and creative way that I saw people advocating was through fashion. For example, what I'm wearing today. Because it was so fast-paced, you have to find a lot of creative ways to make sure that your point gets across. And we have to follow that method going forward. How can we advocate at future COPs? Because it's always going to be fast-paced if we focus on the reality. Persons are always going to have their own prior agenda. So how can we creatively engage with them? How can we reach them? How can we capture their attention? And these are just some of the ways that we're able to do so. And for those of you who are hoping to attend COP 2019 or COP 30, I really encourage you to prepare early. Because at COP, there's so many different things to do. There's so many different streamlines. I mean, persons mentioned that this was the climate COP, the finance COP. But when I had the opportunity to discuss with the Antiguan delegation, I first asked them to give me a quick crash course. So they gave me a full rundown of how to approach COP. And one of the best advice that stuck with me throughout the whole session was, hey, this is it. There are many different processes, there are many different topics. You don't have to pick a topic, and you don't have to follow that topic. And if you want to attend COP30, you really have to start to think within yourself, which area am I going to focus on? Because even though the COP29 was really focused on finance, you'd be shocked to know that there were many discussions and negotiations that was also happening on science. But because we weren't really focused on that, we wasn't really paid attention. And I also heard someone mention health. There are also many discussions on health and negotiations on health. But in order for you to fully navigate COP, you have to choose what area you want to focus on. And that was something that I learned. And so majority of my time was spent in the different pavilions. I spent a lot of time engaging with different stakeholders. And for the Caribbean, we are separated by the ocean. And you would believe it's easy to get to these different islands because we're so close to each other. But unfortunately, if I want to get to one of my sister islands, sometimes it is cheaper for me to come to the US and then go back down to the Caribbean island. So that makes it very challenging for us to engage and interact with each other. And therefore, I had to utilize the time at COP29 in the pavilion to engage with key stakeholders. And therefore, I engaged with many, as you all mentioned, famous people. But I had the opportunity to interact with some famous persons from the Caribbean. So, of course, I had to take the time to engage with our Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown. And in fact, this is how serious we take these events, that he took the time out to have a dinner with every single person who were attending COP29 on behalf of Antigua and Barbuda, and he made sure that he engaged with us to hear perspective. I also had the opportunity to engage with different prime ministers from across the Caribbean countries, and as well as our governing regional bodies. So, for example, the CARICOM Secretariat, I met the Secretary General, I also met the Commonwealth Secretary General, I also met other key stakeholders from Caribbean Development Bank and other key businesses. And all that is important because during those engagements, although most of them were impromptu, it gives you a short window, 1 to 2 minutes. What are you going to say? How are you going to engage? How are you going to make sure that it's worth it? Fortunately for me, they understood the issues that we face, and they are also on the same line, they're trying to advocate. But for you guys, it may be a bit more challenging, because the US have different perspectives. The US sometimes have different beliefs, different policies. And so when you have the chance to interact and navigate, you have to ask yourself, one, who are you going to interact with? What is their beliefs? What is their perspective? What are their views? And sometimes their views might be opposing or might be different. But in order to be a true youth leader, you have to listen. If you want to advocate, you have to know the both perspectives, both sides. You have to truly understand the issue. And so although I'm not a fan of the United States withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, anytime I have the opportunity to engage and someone who believes in that movement, I want to understand why do you believe in it. And the reason why I want to understand why they believe in it is because it provides me an opportunity to do my own research and provide a solid counter-argument. And so as young youth advocates, that is something that I really want to urge you to do. Listen to both sides, even though you don't agree. Because then we'll have the opportunity to truly provide your perspective and who's up for a different argument. Sometimes it's fun. But I really want to encourage you to do that. And one of the things that I really want to stress and give greatest appreciation, because when I was able to meet all those amazing stakeholders, one of my favorite engagement was with you, the students of Boston College. And it's definitely stood out to me. And I really want to give a big shout out to Dominique for introducing me to Kaylee and offering me that opportunity. And anyone asks, it was really shocking to see a college really invest in their students to that level. It's something that's very rare. When you talk about Boston College actually providing finance to send their students halfway across the globe to participate in international conference, that's very limited. If you really observe, those who attended was a part of a small percentage of young people who received a wonderful opportunity. And it's remarkable. It's remarkable that the university continuously finds time to invest in the young people. And what's more surprising to me is that after investing so much funding, they didn't end there, because they invest in something like what we're having today, a COP29 Symposium. And this is pillars and examples that we need to continue and amplify across the globe. And it's something I hope to take back home to my country. But all of this is great. But then now you have to ask yourself, how do we transition from an international conference to actually making a change? Because as I mentioned, sometimes these are just policies. Policies take forever to implement. It's so bureaucratic. and there's so many red tapes. And one of the things that we have been able to do as young people, through sponsorship from PAHO and the CARICOM Secretariat Climate Change and Health Fund, is to provide the young people of the Caribbean and CARICOM youth leaders the opportunity to establish projects within their communities. And so permit me just to read some of the different projects that they have been executing. I'll first start by my project in Antigua and Barbuda, because I know that one from off the top of my head. The project is called the Wetland and Coastline Assessment and Management Project. And essentially what we have done is to take students from the classroom and take them into mangroves. Now, does anybody know, I know there's some environmental studies students. Does anybody can tell me why is mangroves important to the Caribbean?
They help store protection with hurricanes.
Perfect. And okay, great. And there's one more, and those two are very wonderful and definitely correct. But there's one more reason why, well, there are many more reasons why mangroves are important, but there's one more that no one mentioned.
They host biodiversity.
Correct. And so mangroves are actually the homes to our food, the animals that we eat, birds and other wildlife. So it's extremely important for us to teach young people, our students, why mangroves are important. And so that's the project I developed. And so far I was able to engage with at least 8 schools, and that's a very good number because you have at least 48 schools in Ireland, so it's a high percentage. And we're able to engage with those schools and take students on field trips to the mangroves and actually teach them about the different wildlife and why it's important. And we also was able to develop a children-friendly book that they can use and read about the different mangroves that are unique to Antigua and Barbuda. And so it's sustainable. And also, each participant of the program have the opportunity to create their own project proposal, and they will eventually receive funding. So we're empowering young people to be a change and to be present. But there are also, in Trinidad and Tobago, efforts to do a project that's focused on seaweed and sargassum. I'm permitted to read. The project is called Youth Climate Guard, and it's focused on transforming invasive sargassum seaweed into sustainable building blocks and other materials. So basically, what they're trying to do in Trinidad and Tobago is to recycle sargassum, which is currently now invading our sea line and shore, and they want to create cement blocks from it. It's very innovative because they're trying to repurpose invasive species into something now that we can utilize. And so I'm very excited about that, and it's called Youth Climate Guard. In Barbados, they'll be implementing the Junior Agriculture and Gardening Initiative. This project will involve children aged 6 to 7 years old in Barbados by engaging in gardening practices that allow them to develop their agricultural skills, foster creativity, and have a deeper understanding of the environment. Similarly, in Guyana, there are plans on the way for implementation of the project called Cocoa Terra Innovation. This initiative involves the promotion of sustainable agriculture practices in the coconut industry by increasing tree planting and capabilities and capacity building for coconut farmers. Other initiatives which include climate smart agriculture practices, and so in St. Lucia, there's a project called Kids in Agriculture, and this will introduce children to sustainable farming techniques, while in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Community Resilient Building Project will focus on agriculture to strengthen climate resilience. While youth leaders in Jamaica will also launch the Green Thumbs Aqua Ed School Gardening Project to promote sustainable agriculture by implementing a demonstration scale aquaponics system. So essentially, what all that is saying is that we at China are endeavor best to not only advocate on global conferences or via streamlined advocacy, for example, protests and so on, but we're trying to be on the ground in our communities. We're trying to execute projects. We're trying to actually physically make a change that will impact our young people. And so for those of you who attend COP29, with all the knowledge that you have gained, I have one challenge for you. What project can you do? What way can you implement? What project can you implement in your own community, your own village? What outcome are you physically expecting from COP29 that you can bring back to your community? And it doesn't have to be on a large scale, because it could be something as simple as you reaching out to your neighbor and you teaching them about COP29, or you even teaching them, hey, this is what you need to prepare for COP30. And by doing something as simple as that, you can spread the message, you can spread the word. And that is my challenge to you. See what project you can do. See how you can advocate in your own creative way, and I really charge you to do it. And so, before I end, how you feeling? We feel good. We feel so good. Hi. But does anyone have any questions that we would like to ask?
You mentioned the high debt to GDP ratio. One of the movements that's coming from Pope Francis and many others is debt forgiveness.
Yeah.
Are you engaging in that, and what can be done in a practical way to get people who that you owe the money to actually consider debt forgiveness?
Yes, so essentially our Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda and other Prime Ministers across the region strongly support debt forgiveness, and we also support debt restructuring. And so we're asking that countries who we owe debt to not only maybe forgive the debt, but because that's very hard for you to tell a country, well, when you speak of justice, it's something they should do, but financially and economically, some countries will just say no to debt, just forgiving the debt. What we're also putting on the table is debt restructuring. So rather than forgiving the debt, what if you give us opportunity to not repay the debt, but instead use that money to create climate solutions and climate infrastructure in our own local islands? That's something that we're supporting and pushing. There's also a movement that we're calling on agencies and like the UN agency and other corporations to purchase our debt. And when they purchase our debt, they could put bonds in place to have us do similarly to create local solutions to climate change. Because it's something that there's some businesses who, quite frankly, can afford our GDP. And so if they can forgive some of those debts by purchasing it from us, it kind of free up space and allow us to actually invest back in climate change. And it is something that we're ready to do, and we're waiting on countries to support that movement.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned this in your talk about, and this is a challenge I think in the U.S. in terms of getting public support around climate change, just because there's a lot of politicization around the issue. What is it like in the Caribbean in terms of the engagement of ordinary people, and does that exactly grassroots movements in terms of climate crisis? So what is the Republic of for now?
On a large scale, we understand what climate change is because it's our lived reality. But surprisingly, there are many individuals who, just by their normal day-to-day life, don't practice climate action. So, for example, you have communities, let's look at fishing industry, fishing communities. There's some individuals who still overfish. There's some individuals who still pollute heavily. There's some corporations and companies within the country, because of course we're tourism based, and these corporations and companies are owned by foreign entities, so they don't understand the climate, but they understand, but they refuse to practice it because they're not impacted by it. So there are these challenges. But on a large scale, we understand, hey, this is something that is our lived reality and it's affecting all of us, and we try our best to act on it. And there is support for climate change. But what we need now is climate action by each and every single individual. And we also need strengthening policies when it comes to tourism and the promotion of climate-friendly tourism. Because as tourism-based industries, we can't survive without it, but we now need to find creative ways to live around it while making it climate-friendly.
You mentioned the Prime Minister of your country sat and met with literally every single delegate from who went from Antigua to Barbuda. And I was just curious, how do you feel about representation from the SIDS at COP? And how do you navigate challenges with safe resources? Because something that we heard at COP this year was a lot of countries were struggling to find themselves represented or have their voice heard in the negotiation spaces, just with the way negotiations were structured. So just curious.
Well, one of the unique things of COP29, as I mentioned in the speech, is that we're fortunate to have the SIDS4 conference just before COP. And the benefit of that is there were a lot of focus and attention on SIDS4 in Antigua and Barbuda leading up to COP, to the point that the COP presidency had to be there for SIDS4. And so this one was a bit unique, but regardless, from my understanding, there was still a lot to be done. In fact, someone mentioned earlier G77 meetings with China, where there was also a lot of AOSIS meetings. And quite frankly, SIDS4 perspective was still not taken as seriously. As you can tell by the USD 300 billion, it's still far from the 1.3 trillion that we need. So even though there are a lot of coverage on SIDS Island, there's still a lot more to be done and given. Because when you look at it, the SIDS4 make up a good majority of land mass and resources that fuel the entire world. And so we need heavy focus on SIDS4 continually, and we're the ones that are being impacted heavily by climate change. And there's always space and the need for opportunities for the state sports to have louder voices and to be taken very, very seriously and given a lot of spaces at the forefront.
Esquire, thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry, I was scheduled to be with you for dinner last night, but then it happened changes. I couldn't be there. We were slated to meet during the week too. And if you recall, I texted you that you were busy, but he was busy. Which was, I'm sure, you had a far more important things to do. My question is, a lot of SIDS, the countries that represent SIDS, they are grappling with the challenge of sea level rise and the migration and displacement due to sea level rise. So there is a recent agreement between Tuvalu and Australia, where Australia will be having 280 Tuvaluans refugees, who are climate refugees, every year for a foreseeable future to Australia. So that is one of the most significant treaty on climate migration that we see right now, which UN has also ratified. Do you see something like that to happen in your country?
Just to answer your earlier question, so actually for COP29, I was not there for the second week. So that's why I wasn't able to, I think I responded, but I don't remember if I did get a chance to. But I did leave after.
I'm sure that you were busy.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. But, so let me scale it back a bit. So when Hurricane Maria hit Dominica, a lot of the residents from Dominica had to come over to Antigua and Barbados to schools. It was the same instance in Barbados when the entire island was destroyed. They had to come over to Antigua to do schooling in Antigua and live a normal life. The challenge with that is when you're migrating into a new country, you basically lose your culture. You lose your way of being. The future generations, they're not going to be born in the country that they're originally from. They're going to be born whichever they're going to have the passport of the country they're now residing in. And so then you're shifting the entire nation, the entire culture. It's just going to eventually disappear. And two, it provides a more important picture as to why we need to continue to invest in climate change. Because what will happen eventually is that, quite frankly, you're going to have to find a home for us. And whereas we love our state and we want to stay in our islands, if this continues and our islands get destroyed, we need somewhere to live. And more than likely, we might burn in your country. And to avoid all of that and to avoid reshaping the entire world, let's invest in it now. Let's do action now. Because eventually, it's going to impact you. When you look at climate migration, it comes to a point where you're going to not only have to let them in your country, you're going to have to provide food, you have to provide work, you have to provide jobs. And then that's going to create further discussions on peace and security, because then people are going to have problems with losing their jobs, and it creates all these ripple-down effects. I think people don't really realize the impact of climate change at that level, because it's not just about the destruction of land, but as I said, it's the reshaping of culture and the impact that it has to everyone. So, as you mentioned, it's something that, even though the agreement is made, stuff has to be done to ensure that the tool, I think you mentioned, culture is still preserved, because you don't want to lose it, and so we have to look at from that perspective as well. And also to make sure that we're safeguarding, if the sea level continues to rise, make sure we safeguard safe space that these communities can continue to develop. Because it's a problem that's facing Caribbean islands like Guyana, where floods are very constant.
Thank you.
I have a question kind of about so you mentioned the disappointment in terms of, I guess, the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement and, different issues in terms of, I guess, the power imbalances that exist in these global negotiations. I mean, you obviously came here, I'm assuming, because I invited you, but also for other reasons. And I'm wondering, where do you kind of see the future in terms of, I guess, collaboration, specifically between the Caribbean and the US? And how has it shifted, I guess, politically, but also as the climate crisis deteriorates? Where do you see as the focal points for collaboration in the future?
As I speak now, I know for a fact that many of the institutions are responsible for fostering those kind of collaborations, like the UN. They're very skeptical at this point. They're very scared to invest in community projects. They're very scared to invest in exchange programs, because they don't know where the money is going to come from, quite frankly. And so it is important for us now as young people to foster our own synergies, to utilize social media, to engage with each other, to form connections. And one of the things I really hope that Boston College jump on is the opportunity to continue engagement with the CARICOM countries. And I'll forever do my best to connect you guys to other Caribbean youth leaders, because together we can make a massive impact. And we also have to begin to look expanding beyond country level, but how can we as collectively force corporations to make change? And so that's something that we have to do, work together by doing our own thing, because if we continue to wait, we'll forever be in a period of uncertainty or uncertainty.
You talked about the imbalance in negotiations between the bigger countries and the smaller countries. My understanding of the COP mechanism is that it requires consensus for anything to be passed, which means any one country can block the whole thing. So with that power to block everything as a small country, I would think there would be power, especially when you have groups of countries coming together to say, no, if this isn't in the agreement, you're not going to have any agreement. So I don't know, am I understanding the mechanism properly and how that power can work?
What I would say is that based on the explanation that you give, right, that allows, the world isn't fair, and just to be realistic, yeah, and isn't equal. There are a lot of things that happen that can influence certain decisions. Therefore, even though we have equal power, it's easy for larger nations to try and influence a decision because they hold stakeholders or they hold power of that country. So then there's also that blind spot that we don't really often pay attention to, because you have to ask yourself, okay, why are some of these nations not agreeing to something that they understand is important? And it's simply because their hands are tied behind their back. So we now have to find ways to tie their hand behind their back, but we're forcing them to do the right thing. But larger nations sometimes fuel the decision not only in the negotiation rooms, but behind closed doors. And the persons mentioned earlier that they're sure meetings are happening behind closed doors. I don't know if that's the truth, I can't say. But then if it is, then that would probably explain why some things are happening the way they are.
That reminds me of the story I heard. A small nation voted against the United States in the UN, and the UN representatives said that's the most expensive vote we've ever made, and they pulled all their aid.
Exactly.
So you can have a vote.
And you can tell by the recent movement of US aid no longer being available and these kinds. So this is sometimes things that we're afraid of. We're afraid of, hey, if we advocate, you might withdraw or you might stop the funding from us. And it even explains why some larger organizations tend to have certain views, because even though they know what's right, they have to say where the money's coming from. And so when we analyze some of these organizations, you have to see who's funding them and the decisions that they're making. And that's something that I tend personally to look deeply into. And it is showing right now. If you observe the arena, it's showing in the actions that are taking place right now.
How many years you have been as, you have a list of accolades, but as a UN youth delegate, if I could simplify, your years of experience as a youth leader, as a youth delegate, have you observed concrete changes in your country towards like conscious efforts on climate change?
Yes, certainly.
Because whenever I engage with quite a few youth delegates, and there's a lot of conversation on really bringing youth together, advocacy, really community organizing and things like that. What I really am seeking is that are there concrete changes that have happened in the communities, and if you could really shed some light on that.
Yes, so on a governmental level, there are a number of policies that are currently being introduced, and so when there are agreements made to follow a particular US, like so the Paris Agreement or something like that, there are policies that you have to implement on a country level. And this is why sometimes countries are afraid to agree to it. But there are policies that you have to follow. And so actually on Monday when I return, there's going to be a consult should be a consultation on our country progress, because they have to submit annual reports. So there's something like that. So there are policies that are being made, but of course policies are always going to be slow moving. But what from the UN Small Grant perspective, that's a funding agency. UN Small Grant has been able to fund a number of grassroots projects, and this is why I keep stressing on it's so important for us as individuals to try and make change. So let me give an example. There's an organization called Good Human 268 in Antigua, and they focus on recycling and repurposing plastic bottles. So before the government had the initiative, which is also a good movement, where because in Antigua, most of our products are imported, and we don't have a strong recycling facility locally. So the government started an initiative where persons could then bring in recycling plastic bottles and receive 20 cents. And then they would pay you for the bottles that you have, and then they would recycle them. And the program came to a halt. And so a non-profit organization took on that challenge. And currently, they have collected so many water bottles. And what they have done is they took the project from you bringing in your water bottle to scaling it up. So now, they're recycling bins in every single school on Ireland. They put project in place to teach the students about recycling, and their continual efforts to ensure that recycling efforts are taking place. An organization that I'm a part of called the Upper Coastline, we focus on cleaning up our coastlines, and we're doing this through actually being on the ground cleaning the coastline ourselves, and also teaching other students about the importance of doing so, and also providing different opportunities for upskilling yourself and earning a revenue. So there are actions like these that I personally prefer. So before I was an advocate on this level, I was a grassroots community man. I was always on the field, and I still do that every time. So when I go back home, I'm going to be doing beach cleanup. I do beach cleanups at least twice a month. And so that's something that I prefer doing. I prefer young people advocating, but advocate through action. And don't just talk, but find a creative way to make a change on the ground as well. And that's where you actually see something happening. And then, surprisingly, when the government say grassroots organization making change, you know what they're gonna do? They're gonna jump on the bandwagon. Because if they don't, society's gonna have pressure to them, and they don't want that because they want to win elections. And that is how you actually make change. And that has worked for me.
Kind of perfect timing. 1:29. That was artfully done. So we're going to move into our poster session where you have an opportunity to kind of continue these conversations that we started with the panel and with Esquire's great presentation. Thank you